What if there was a memory technique and a way to make your memory palace networks that did more than help you remember information for your tests or perform better at work or at school? What if in addition to learning words and phrases in a new language, there were mnemonics that would help you develop discipline, personal virtue, and wisdom? And because life is not just a series of problems that need to be solved, what if there was a bottomless well of joy as you tell jokes and amuse your friends and family with delightful anecdotes? Do you think such a memory palace might help you better weather life's many storms? One man created not one but 4 such memory palaces for himself. It is one of the most interesting memory palace networks I've ever seen, and it helps answer a question about memory palaces I get asked about a lot. Can I use memory palaces based on TV shows, movies, video games, and even just locations I've invented myself? Well, magnetic friends, the neuroscientists and ancient gurus tell us there is no such thing as the self. But all the same, in this case study, I'll show you how I reproduced one of Hugh's arks for myself as a memory palace. I'll share the ins and outs, the pros and cons of setting it up and replicating it. And to run the experiment, I had to navigate all of these issues because Noah's Ark is multi-layered in my memory. I imagined it purely from words launched from the pulpit at a very young age. I've seen illustrations in books, watched the Ark float Noah and his family to safety in more than one movie, and when I was a professor, I used to use the story myself from another kind of pulpit when I was giving my lectures. I wasn't providing a spiritual lesson, but using the Ark and a certain glitch in the mind's use of pattern recognition to test if my students were awake or not. See if you're awake. I used to ask them whenever I taught my course on adaptations of literature into movies, how did Moses take the animals onto the ark? Rare was the student who caught me. Most students shouted out, in pairs, in pairs. He took them onto the ark in pairs. They did not notice that their minds had seized upon the word ark and annihilated the word Moses from consciousness. Now, they were certainly thinking of Noah when they answered my question, but something in the brain led them down an incorrect path. And this is a problem with focused attention that partly explains why I personally find imaginary and invented memory palaces much more challenging than traditional magnetic memory palaces. It's unfortunately easy to make mistakes with imagery like this, especially when we're linking space together with sights and sounds in the ways we talked about last time in Aristotle's nuclear alphabet. But ultimately, using Noah's Ark in combination with Aristotle's nuclear alphabet was a deeply fulfilling experiment. And although I prefer traditional memory palace work, running experiments and using memory techniques in new ways is key to improving all aspects of the mind. It helps me deepen for others the thinking, the strategy, and the tactics that I have been emulating from ancient scholars for decades as I pursue wisdom and what many memory masters and philosophers before me have described as a journey into light, or perhaps what I would prefer to call pure immanence. It's not all about mystical wisdom and philosophy, however. As I do myself, I'm sure the memory master who fashioned 4 arks to help him memorize scripture and to memorize wisdom and philosophy also used memory techniques to memorize practical, daily things as rapidly as possible. Who am I talking about? Hugh of St. Victor, who lived circa 1096 to 1141. He also had practical wisdom in mind, and he really thought it was the first step. And he brought us the idea of basing a memory palace on Noah's Ark, not Moses' Ark. Though with some imagination, you can figure out a way to do that too. This is a bit of a stretch, but you could say that Hugh also wrote one of the first books in the genre we now call speed reading. But there's a massive difference, because Hugh's Didascalicon is actually worth reading, and it puts the charlatans, the quacks, and the scammers of our era to shame. Would you like to know what Hugh of St. Victor said about how to read better? Stick around, hit that thumbs up, and subscribe to follow this channel if you love luxury learning experiences that improve your memory and help you establish greater wisdom, virtue, and discipline in your life, and be able to tell a good joke or story too. Because as I grow this mission to focus minds around the world on what it really means to learn and remember so that you can experience better living through optimized memory, we need as many of you as we can get. And we need to spend a little bit of time thinking about how Hugh of St. Victor approached memory techniques. It's a point about memory techniques so many people miss, and every time it breaks my heart. They know about mnemonics and other memory aids and how all memory techniques are ultimately based on association. But there's a difference between generic association and magnetic association. Let me give you a quick example of the difference based on the kind of weak examples you have probably seen in any number of memory improvement books. I don't know about you, but I find them strange almost every time. More often than not, the average memory improvement author thinks there will come a day when you have to memorize a list of words like box, tree, car, and cake. So to use association, you imagine a box falling on a tree so hard that it bends over to push a car, which then rolls over a cake. Now yes, at a memory competition, this form of linking works. You just replay the little story and the keywords come back to you. To a certain extent, this form of linking can be useful in everyday life as well. Heaven forbid you forget the kinds of food you like to eat. You could use this whiz-bang technique to memorize a shopping list. Now, I don't mean to diminish this technique at all. I use it quite a bit. But is it going to help you memorize verbatim texts in a way that leads to wisdom? Wisdom that helps you weather the troubles and travails of life? No, maybe for you, but definitely not for me. And that's why I'm so attracted to real deal memory masters like Hugh of St. Victor, who rely on pre-existent schemata. That's the term Conrad Rudolph uses in his detailed study of Hugh's Noah's Ark artistry, the Mystic Ark. Here's what Rudolph means by pre-existent schemata, but only in part, so we can build gradually and magnetically upon the basics of association. Instead of relying on the generic idea of a box falling on a tree, you instead use knowledge that already exists in your mind to amplify the basic association. It's not any old box, but an Amazon box used to deliver you a copy of Chaos in Boxes by Sean Lusu, which if you're into music, you really need to read. The tree is not any old tree, it's your favorite tree, the one you climbed as a kid. Or for someone like Hugh of St. Victor, it might be the tree in the Garden of Eden. And that's an imaginary memory palace element that can help strengthen your mind if you use something like that you've never actually seen. So the car and the cake, they need to be as specific too, as specific as possible. The car in the movie Get Carter, for example. Something so vividly that has already been imagined for you. That's what Hugh's trying to do with his ark, is imagine the space for you so that you can use it and have it be something that you rest upon, that's specific, that you've seen with your own eyes. But in the case of Get Carter, I'm talking about choosing images already in memory in our era. Not just any old image, but images made by the highest paid creatives in the field, filmmakers and actors in this case. And when it comes to Get Carter, this mnemonic example for car contains the sound of the word you want to recall from the list. These are the things we magnetic mnemonists have time for, when the clock is off and wisdom is our goal. But even with the clock off, when I want to memorize omnium expedendorum prima est sapientiae in qua perfecti boni forma consistit, which is one of Hugh's great lines in Latin, I don't want it to take forever either. And nor did it. Because here's the kicker that helps take the art of memory based on pre-existing imagery to yet another level. Instead of having these associations float randomly in the mind, hung on a slim narrative built from generic boxes falling on unspecified trees, something that can in fact never happen in a way that a box from Amazon could potentially happen to strike a tree in the hands of a disgruntled employee or delivery driver, you pull back the camera and you have a full, well-formed magnetic set of associations laid out on well-formed specific spaces. And those specific spaces could, as I have found, be an arc. Now that space is in your mind or in your heart, as Hugh would say, and the pre-existent schemata for the space is based on something deeply familiar to you. Yes, I'm repeating it. It's important. The more familiar it is, the more time you've spent with it, the more it's going to be magnetic, save you time, and kick back the target information you're memorizing. So ideally, You use a space that you've spent a lot of time in, like your home. Placing Amazon boxes falling on trees in your living room so you can recall both simple things and vast webs of information more complex is called the memory palace technique. And when you use your home, you're basing the memory palaces on pre-existing schemata. Now, I'm not entirely sure if Hugh of St. Victor used his home or his school as a memory palace, but we do know that he described imaginary memory palaces, and I've learned a ton from what he says about them. But many people in his era wouldn't think that Noah's Ark was imaginary, but they would have to use their imagination to develop it in their minds, and that's why he created the Ark painting, which scholars like Rudolph believe he taught from directly. But before Hugh would teach that as a learning and memory device, he wanted you to start with something even more conceptual. So let's turn now to one of his exercises for beginners. Imagine a cash register. You remember those? You had a number of segments in the tray for pennies, nickels, dimes, and quarters. Now, Hugh uses this image based on the money changers of his time, perhaps even thinking of the merchants Jesus expelled from the temple. You need something like this to help organize your mind, Hugh tells us, because that way, when you're memorizing historical dates, you can organize and keep the pieces of information separated with greater ease. And if you've been using memory techniques and the secret principles hidden in Aristotle's nuclear alphabet for a while, you might have encountered some of these problems. Border blur and ghosting happens a lot when the magnetic memory method principle of recall rehearsal is not in play and you don't have information separated in this cash register formation that Hugh is describing. Sometimes all the magnetic imagery in the world doesn't really help and can make the problems worse if they're not correctly divided in space. And that's all the more so important for me because I don't see things in my mind as clearly as some other people seem to do, so that separation tends to blur. The cash register idea is great for that because it gives you a mental model. And for those of us who can't see images, we really have to rely less on our mind's eye, and so keeping these images separate as if they were coins or dollar bills in a cash register, this is genius, and he came up with this a very long time ago. It's a conceptual memory palace, but it's based on a thing that most people would have seen, and you can base a memory journey on this conceptual space with an actual reference behind it. And you can do it over and over and over again because you can reproduce the cash box in this church and have another one in this place in the market. You could have one in this bedroom, that bedroom, in the hallway, in the bathroom, all over the place. So here's how I tried what Hugh is suggesting based on the cash box arrangement. And these suggestions are in a manuscript called The 3 Best Memory Aids for Learning History. Hugh probably has a cash box memory palace in mind for history specifically because just as a cash box is all about the numbers that represent value, history is about the numbers that represent when in time things took place. And you can find this arrangement in The Medieval Craft of Memory, which is a book edited by Mary Carruthers and Jan M. Tsiolkovsky. Using only an imagined tray for pennies, nickels, dimes, and quarters from left to right, I imagined an imaginary line running vertically from 1 to 11 down to the side in order to memorize the example in Hugh's work. Now, I already used several number systems, so I drew upon those. And there's a logic behind 1 is a candle and 2 is a swan. It's a system that I use that you can access as part of the Magnetic Memory Method Masterclass, and you can use it in combination with a 00 to 99 PAO, which is a more robust memory system also taught in that program. Now, although these systems sound difficult, they're actually fun and easy to develop. And I memorized the associations and wrote them out with my hand to speed up the learning process. And that is a set of steps that's very specific. Refer to the memory palace, bring the target information together with the associations, and then move on to the next piece, the next piece, the next piece. So in this case, nothing takes place in the penny drawer. An image for Adam sits in the nickel drawer, then in the dime drawer, Adam gives birth to the Hoover Dam, which crashed down on a donut. Now, why are these images in play? Well, dam is my word for 13, and the Hoover Dam is the clear, crisp, and specific reference I chose to make it magnetic. The donut is my 0, but in my mind it's not just any donut. It's Homer Simpson's donut, and he is very angry that it is crushed. Finally, where the quarters rest, the image for 9:30 is Pamela Anderson, also with a donut. No, we won't be talking about what Pamela Anderson is doing with that donut. We're just not going there. But rest assured, nothing like it was ever seen in an episode of Baywatch. The next step is to inch down one line to the second position and do the same thing with Seth. In this case, the starter image is a swan, 130 is tied back to its previous appearance, and new images are placed in the diamond quarter drawers to encode the numbers 105 and 912. And so it goes for the rest of the list. I'm pretty sure I understood that this is what Hugh is talking about. I don't know that he knew about 1 as a candle or anything like the major system at his time, but it's possible that he did. But he doesn't really seem to explain what exactly you would place in these places to remember those specific numbers. However, this is just a starter exercise. And he's got one more starter exercise for you with numbers. And I'm not sure I 100% understand the level of sophistication Hugh wanted his students to develop, but my interpretation is that he seems to think that serious students of mnemonics need to practice the same kind of spatial coding you would use with a memory palace, but without a strict spatial reference. And it makes sense to me, and that's why he takes you to the next level by getting you to use raw numbers, and these numbers, as I understand it, form multiple rows in a field. Here's an image that I think expresses what Hugh has in mind, and it's certainly the closest thing I could find to what happens in my mind when I explore and experiment with this technique. So we have extracted our field of positions from the cache box or cache register, and now we just have either actual numbers in space in a field or potential numbers. So we'll have an example of using this to memorize something in a minute, but imagine that just here is a 0, or let's say it's a 1, and then right next to it we're going to have a 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Now those are actual numbers in that row of 10, but then we have the potential numbers where we can have on our number 1, we can have 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 going in this direction up, but we can also have that same set of numbers going down. Or conceivably, we can have minus down, so -1, -2, -3, etc. And that can be in potential in any position. So the extent to which this is useful as a memory palace is going to be up to your own experimentation, and I'll give you an example where I talk about some of the possibilities in a second. But the reality is we don't really know what he was talking about, but this is something like my best guess. And I think it's really powerful to play around with in your existing traditional memory palaces, because when you think about that difference between actual numbers and potential numbers, any place you have a number, you have the potential for all the numbers that surround it, plus, minus, X, Y axis, and so forth. So you can really do a lot with this concept. And we'll see something like this again in Giordano Bruno. And there I can see how Bruno maybe had access to Hugh's ideas and interpreted Hugh's version of something like a field, but Bruno makes it into the alphabet, and I cover that in my video called The Field. Back to Hugh to try his version of what he's talking about that's more abstract than the cache box. Just get rid of the cache box and start with a 0 to the extreme left. Now you can also imagine that that 0 is also an A, specifically an A for Adam. Now if you're familiar with a painting of Adam, you might want to use it to make the reference more specific. Or you can use a friend with maybe multiple atoms, as I tend to do, rotating through different atoms that I know for different memory purposes. I don't know about you, but you might want to not use the biblical Adam. Some people aren't a big fan of him. If the stories are true, he got us kicked out of the garden after all. Now I'm just kidding, but we do know that in Hugh's time, many people thought that using mental imagery could harm you. And I think that that's worth pausing upon, because many people ask me, I don't want to use images that are exaggerated. I don't want goofy stuff in my mind. And sometimes we mnemonists use things that are a little bit more aggressive, you might even call violent, and they have concerns about that. And I think that's very important to have concerns about that. However, I think that those are personal decisions. I make decisions to not self-censor, and we happen to live in a world where a lot of censorship leads to very bad things. Salman Rushdie recently, for example, his books were censored. People said that he really was not worthy of having a life, and he wound up getting damaged quite badly, his actual physical body. I would encourage all of us to not be the censor. Strive to be the good person Hugh wants his students to be. It's okay to make use of things that we're fond of in our memory palaces, but disliking is itself memorable. And I've found personally that letting the poison flow through the sacred space of a memory palace maintains the memorable effect while neutralizing the toxicity. So, in the Sanskrit memorization projects I've shared with you, particularly in The Victorious Mind, I talked about the like-dislike monster. I mentioned the like-dislike monster in my TEDx talk. It's very, very important to not be yanked around by imagery in the world, and certainly not by imagery in your mind. So, even if you dislike a thing, think about how you could have peace with that thing by using it to help you in your work with using memory techniques to learn faster and remember more. You could even memorize something from the book of Numbers to help you with this skill. For 14:18 says, "The Lord is long-suffering and of great mercy, forgiving iniquity and transgression, and by no means clearing the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children unto the third and fourth generation." I haven't memorized that myself yet, but it is a thing to consider. If the Creator himself can forgive without forgetting, I think we can too. So the question ultimately is, how would you use the number grid to help memorize a line like from Numbers verbatim? Would you have images for all the numbers and start at the 14th position with the word "the" because it's the 14th verse, and then place each word that follows on the next number? Or would you build upwards, stacking your words and your images for them on top of the other? Or would you just start with an independent field just for that biblical verse? In a case like that, you would have 0 to infinity, and you would start with the first word of the verse and move to the next and the next and the next. And I don't know how you'll proceed, but you have these options, and you'll be much better suited to the task when you're not worried about the appropriateness of your images, and forgive your own iniquity and the iniquities of others, so that you remember much more useful things as you cleanse the foundation, which is your consciousness. Ultimately, the number field is a good exercise, and you should try it. Create a field built from numbers. Navigate it with your mind. If you already have your number systems in play, try navigating it mentally first with the first number system you've built, like say the candle for 1 system, then switch to system 2, like maybe the major system, then switch to system 3, like a 00 to 99 PAO, and navigate these fields. Navigate them horizontally, navigate them vertically. Navigate them into the receding distance in front of you towards a vanishing point, and then imagine the field behind you and navigate it with those different systems. These are powerful exercises for strengthening how you perceive space, how you perceive associations in space, and how ultimately you can avoid that mistake of thinking that the stars are only above you, when all physics shows they surround us 24/7. Now, I've played with all of these concepts, and they're very, very rewarding. Now I'm going to show you how I played with Hugh's Ark concept for a learning project. But first, a fair warning. If you want to know Hugh's Ark and how it can be used to develop memory palaces in intimate detail, please read Conrad Rudolph's study, The Mystic Ark. I agree with Rudolph's ultimate assessment because I myself have taught the memory palace technique for over a decade, and Rudolph's assessment is this. There's a difference between how Hugh taught his students the Ark and how Hugh certainly actually used it in his personal practice. Understand this well. No one can show you how exactly the memory palace technique is used. It's pretty much like Morpheus tells Neo in The Matrix. Unfortunately, no one can be told what the Matrix is. You have to see it for yourself. Now for Neo, it's relatively easy. He just chooses the correct pill, and bang presto, he's out of the Matrix. Now he can finally start to see reality for what it really is. But in the case of the cache box or the number grid, or especially the Ark, you have to build these matrices for yourself in order to enter them and use them for memory. Now, almost all your questions will be answered in the doing, and what most people tell me once they're on the path is that they wish they'd gotten started sooner. Hugh says pretty much the same thing himself in the Didascalicon. All that matters, he said, is the truth of the deeds done, reviewing from beginning to end what has been done, when it has been done, where it has been done, and by whom it has been done. And if that person isn't you, exploring and experimenting with these techniques through dedicated study and practice, then the only question is, what are you waiting for? Visit magneticmarymethod.com and get into the world's only luxury memory training program for people with big goals that matter, like being that best possible person for your family, your community, and your organizations that you serve. And of course, for you, the bearer of the Ark within. Now, I built my first Ark, and I'm so glad I did, after reading the opening of the Didascalicon, which I cited for you. And I'll just close my eyes again because it's so beautiful. I think I've gotten this correct. Omnium expetendorum prima esse sapientia in qua perfecti boni forma consistit. I see it here on my screen. Yes, I use a teleprompter. It's because I don't want to memorize the speeches that I make for you on these videos, but I do want to memorize things like that phrase. And what does it mean? It means literally that the most important thing above all is to seek wisdom, to cultivate a curiosity for all fields of knowledge. And using memory, you make an effort to unify knowledge so that it has a form in your mind that you can easily navigate. And I memorized this line using a standard memory palace based on, quite frankly, the icky outside of a nearby grocery store. It's ickier than the cash box in the temple that I used with Hugh's exercise. Hey, I'm a carpenter who builds with the tools at hand. So long as the knowledge is perfecti boni, the canvas can be impure. Indeed, if you get to where I sometimes manage to be in my own practice, there's no difference between pure and impure anyway. They're emerging from the same pure immanence they're smashing back into. And memorizing this line only strengthened my sense of this because, as Hugh says, what matters is the truth of the deeds done. But after memorizing this simple line, I got a hankering for more Latin, and so I built an Ark. I started, as I usually do, with a simple sketch in my handy-dandy memory journal. Yes, it's cool to be able to imagine complex memory palaces without drawing, but if you're like me, you just like to get things done. So I always suggest drawing memory palaces to cut to the chase, but also to be able to see and cut out any issues in navigation in advance. Now, this Ark that I wound up using is different than what Hugh describes because I'm looking at it head on. And that's because I decided to memorize some Latin scripture that refers to light. And the ways that various memory masters have described light fascinates me, and it's a long-term research project of mine to see what I can learn about this because I too had the bulb switch on back in 2017. Now, whether or not you want to have this light switch on in your head, that's up to you, but this is what I suggest that you do. Look at exactly what it is you want to memorize. Design the Ark to fit the cause. This will help ensure the coming storms don't easily tear it apart. So I chose the book of John because it has a reference to light, and I just started to memorize it along a line in this Ark. In principio erat verbum, et verbum erat apud Deum, et Deus erat verbum. I think that's right. I think that's the one that begins with, in the beginning was the word or the logos. Now, what I'm about to describe is a little bit more complicated, but I just wanted to describe the way that I did it. So if you're not following all of the plot here, it's just because I'm using multiple things at the same time, which is part of my own practice, to push, to explore, to experiment, as I hope that you do too. And what I did is I realized that all of these verses are numbered. And I have been working again after many, many years away with a mem deck called a mnemonic stack. This is for magic tricks, card magic. And so I realized I could experiment with a different kind of number grid. Now, very briefly, each card in my memorized stack takes an image from my larger 00 to 99 PAO. Literally, it takes 52 images from the 00 to 99 arrangement. So 4 of clubs is the top card in the mnemonica stack. And the image is of Jim Carrey with a lyre, like a 4-stringed instrument sort of thing, or however many strings a lyre has. And the logic is that Jim Carrey also starred in a movie called Liar Liar. Now, why these images? Why Jim Carrey? Well, that's because this card is 54 in the system, and if it appears as a starter image and a bridging figure for in principio erat verbum, then I have something that adds an additional layer of specificity, because Noah's Ark isn't that specific to me in my mind. And this really helped. By following the principle of association and basing things on Rudolph's lovely term, pre-existent schemata, my images for the cards snapped easily into place. Cards 1 to 26 down the left side of the ark, 27 to 52 down the right side. And this idea of linking figures to the ark is suggested by Hugh himself. If you look closely, there are figures all over the place on his ark, and their meanings help create links to the space that are baked in. Now, I could have used Adam and Seth and other figures from the money box exercise, but I don't know the biblical figures nearly as well as I know my 00 to 99 PAO, and especially the 52 characters that are used in my memdeck work. And by the way, if you're interested in learning how to memorize cards and developing a 00 to 99 PAO, I teach these skills not just in the Magnetic Mary Method Masterclass, but in a new project I'm working on called Magnetic Fiction. And there's a new story called Conjuring Confessions, which is part of my Memory Detective series. It's fun, and it lets you know the name of any card at any number position in the deck, and you can learn it through story. It will help you better understand what Aristotle means about entering the middle of the alphabet, as we talked about in Aristotle's nuclear alphabet. This is just such a powerful strategy. And a channel subscriber named Born to Be Great was kind enough to ask some questions about this tactic of entering the middle of the alphabet. And he says, although I have to admit that I didn't fully understand the part where we went over Aristotle's text, when he commented on having different thoughts, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, and then he goes into saying if you don't remember H while being at E, you can go either to F or D, then he adds that going back to A would affect the recollection. That was a bit confusing. Well, one way to really understand that is to memorize a deck of cards, because if you know that the King of Diamonds is at 26, and then you know the 5 of Diamonds is at 25, and you're able to navigate that, that's entering the memory palace in the middle. Now, that's not strictly an alphabetical association as Aristotle is talking about, but it is at the same time, because 26 has a number which is a word also, which is John Nash, right? So it gets a little bit complicated if you don't know these systems. And that's why I answered Born to Be Great. In my experience, these matters never get clear until the individual starts using the techniques to experience what Aristotle's talking about. Now, the luminous detail aspect is beyond name and form. And so I asked him, have you used so far any internally numbered and or alphabetized memory palaces? If not, I'd suggest giving that a try and then running a few sessions with recall rehearsal. And I'm confident the meaning of what this is going to emerge. Put more directly, what Aristotle's saying and what I'm essentially saying is really a Zen kind of paradox. Until your memory palaces are correctly constructed, you'll never be able to enter at any point and recite anything from that point forwards and backwards. In the same way that I can go, okay, so 26, that's John Nash. I can go forward, I can go backward. I know what the cards are before and after. I know what they are numerically, but I also know what their alphabet is. Well, until you do it, you can't really know what it is to do it. So the second part of the paradox is that the way to get to that ability is to practice entering at multiple points and navigating them using recall rehearsal. And although Aristotle didn't have our contemporary knowledge of how to establish memories faster and with greater longevity in the ways that I've learned from Hermann Ebbinghaus and his discovery of principles like primacy effect, recency effect, the forgetting curve, and how to beat the forgetting curve, it's fascinating how early what Aristotle is talking about appeared. So Ebbinghaus scientized something that is in Aristotle, and I perceived it in Aristotle, I believe, because, if memory serves, I had read Ebbinghaus first, and then I thought, that's what that is. But I'd also already used memory palaces. So, in other words, take action, get results. Understanding will come. But understanding probably isn't possible for many of us from day one. It certainly wasn't possible for me. Far from it. But I let action itself shine light into the darkness, and I continue to do so to great reward. Because the thing that I discover, the more that I learn about memory, is that there's more to know about memory. It's like shining that light into darkness reveals just how much more darkness remains. That's not scary, that's beautiful. That's the stuff of life. Now back to Hugh's arc-based memory palace strategy. I was ready to memorize at least a little from the book of John, and I figured I had the best of multiple worlds, and I did a little bit. Each plank of the ark had a starter image that I could also use to give the verse numbers if I wanted, and I just had to move from left to right along the imagined plank. And this worked for a couple of lines. The problem I found was that, well, you might call it a kind of vortex. After a few lines, my mind kept returning to the space occupied by the first line. And this is generally a problem I've had with imaginary memory palaces and memory palaces based on imaginary spaces before. When your mind's eye is low on the visual threshold, there's not much to see. And there's this strong sense of numbers locked in specific areas of mnemonic space, but once you start adding dynamic associations, they seem to want to combine like thousands of angels dancing on the surface of a single pin. So the solution I found was to use an implied arc, an arc I'd seen with my own eyes, upon which I could layer the opening of John and give my playing card images stronger footing with Noah's Ark, or Hugh's ideas about Noah's Ark, implied upon it, or imposed upon it. And the more I read Rudolph's assessment of Hugh of St. Victor's Ark, I realized that this is probably how Hugh's students did it too. Rudolph does two things in the Mystic Ark book. He actually had a full-scale version of the Ark created and displayed at the National Gallery in Washington during the winter of 2008 and 2009. And he created a reproduction of what Hugh might have looked like, teaching directly from the Ark as his students came to form memories with it. In other words, it's unlikely that Hugh had people say, look, memorize this Ark in your mind, and then use it to understand and learn and memorize other stuff. Much more likely is that he had the Ark behind him, and he taught from the Ark, and the images of the Ark that they wound up using were imprinted in their minds because they interacted with him and with it in real time, in real space. So that's what I decided I needed to do. And the implied Ark that came to my mind was one I'd spent no doubt thousands of hours in front of during church when I was a kid. Now, I don't know if the implied arc that I decided upon is actually meant to evoke the arc, but it certainly does in my mind, and I think you can see why that it implies the arc if you think about it. And it doesn't exactly have 26 panels, and they don't run perfectly horizontally as if it's an actual place or an arc, but it still makes for a stronger point of reference for me. And better yet, when I am ready to create another arc and reproduce it, I can use the walls of the chapel to form more arcs. And that way, there's no border blur or ghosting, and it just simply gives more space. And it may be that ultimately there can't be 52 stations on a single wall, but I don't have to have that, because if I decide to ultimately shift or change how that I'm memorizing the book of John in Latin, I can use the magnetic memory method. But this memory palace is a great starter for the project because it's now based on a real place that I've seen. In fact, one of the high schools that I attended is right next door, and although its building and the surrounding area has been used for other things, such as memorizing the Atma Bodha in Sanskrit, I can do so much personal work inside of this church because there was one preacher in particular in this church who did horrible things to kids there, to me in particular, and I can now and already have started to cleanse that. I can cleanse it, and I already feel that cleansing by memorizing this text about light, using this church with Hugh's Ark. Do you have something like that in your life? You might want to consider a similar memory project so that you can feel better. And rest assured, these things are well demonstrated in science, particularly Tim Dalglish's work with PTSD and depression, which I've talked about many times before on this channel. Ultimately, I don't know the future. I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm probably not going to adapt Hugh's Ark much further because I simply don't share the pre-existent schemata that he did, and I also don't share the needs to memorize the exact knowledge that he and his students needed. And it's not just a matter of knowing the Bible well enough to base it all upon the cultural references that Hugh gets into moving forward and backward throughout the Ark. It's also a matter of how practical it is to spend the time imagining an Ark that would be useful enough for long-term verbatim projects compared to the modern use of the Magnetic Mary Method. But it doesn't have to be one or the other. The mission of the Magnetic Mary Method is to explore as many different variations of memory techniques as possible, to absorb and continue using what's useful, and to come back to things that were abandoned because we actually remember experiments we did in the past that we can revive. Now, although Rudolph shows the different ways you can mentally rotate the Ark, the slices that I came up with as I was thinking through this to divide the different chapters in the book of John, moving from aft to stern, from port to starboard, and in every possible direction the mind knows how to travel, is just too much compared to the 2 to 3 minutes it takes to craft a well-formed magnetic memory palace. But again, these are experiments that can be returned to time and time again, and this already has improved my practice, even though I'm very, very unlikely to want to have 52 stations on any individual wall. I now know how to do it if I did want to, and I can run more experiments. And these are ultimately personal decisions, and if you already know more about the Bible, you might want to explore this even deeper by making sure that you fuel yourself with these research references, these resources. And I feel that that's precisely what my work is here to do. And so I share this with Hugh. He had this passion to improve himself as a teacher, to bring out this knowledge. And so thank you for being part of this and for sharing these things around and commenting and so forth. So to that end, I want to thank Ronald Johnson from the Craft of Memory podcast for sharing with me this research resource, which is Ivan Illich's In the Vineyard of the Text. And it is a commentary on Hugh's work, specifically in the Didascalicon, which I think is well worth adding to the pool on top of reading Rudolph's work in the Mystic Ark and, of course, Mary Carruthers. Now, I promised I would share some of Hugh's reading secrets in the Didascalicon, and I will just as soon as I say thanks again to Ronald Johnson for suggesting the Illich text to our channel members, everyone who has any of my books and courses, and you for coming this far along the journey with me. If you're having fun, love knowledge, and want to continually deepen your enjoyment of the utter luxury that is the present moment by refining your memory, make sure to help the mission by sending a flood against the arc of the like button. It can handle it. Get subscribed if you aren't already, and check this out. Hugh teaches pretty much the same tactics I've been teaching when it comes to reading since I was taught how to teach reading at Rutgers back in 2006. It's the foundational steps in my Read with Momentum program, which will take place again live in the very near future. And if you are subscribed at magneticmarymethod.com, you will get first notice on first dibs on a seat when we go live again with this cohort program. Now, simply put, the Didascalicon says the following: reading is really about gathering. This means that you reduce books and articles to outlines. How? You need to train your mind to spot the key principles. The only way to do this is to train yourself by getting started and practicing gathering itself. As you proceed, you find what Hugh calls the fountainheads and derivative streams. This is an interesting choice of words because reading is like a kind of cartography. He says that the untrained memory is dull and likes brevity. But as explorers like ourselves know, the world is fast, and you have to travel into the territory in order to map it. So derivative basically means river. Find rivers, and you'll be able to map territories that lead you to lakes and even oceans. Hugh says that only through practice can you learn to derive the larger oceans from the key points you gather along the journey. As you journey, you must chew those concepts in the mouth of your mind and regurgitate them back into the air from the stomach of your memory. And this point is key. Hugh cautions you to never be happy because you've read a bunch of stuff. Only be happy about what you've retained. Let me read you a key passage. I know there are certain fellows who want to play the philosopher right away. They say that stories should be left to pseudo-apostles. The knowledge of these fellows is like that of an ass. Don't imitate persons of this kind. But that's what we have to do in order to memorize large volumes of information. We have to read both the good and the bad. We have to regurgitate it into the air. And sometimes we will seem like an ass, and sometimes we will be. So we need to translate the information into stories. Stories that we place inside of structures we build inside our hearts. But Hugh goes further. Pay attention now. I have proposed to you something contemptible to gapers, but worthy of imitation to those who understand. The foundation is in the earth, and it does not always have smoothly fit stones. The superstructure rises above the earth, and it demands a smoothly proportioned construction. Even so, the divine page in its literal sense contains many things which seem both to be opposed to each other and sometimes to impart something which smacks of the absurd or the impossible. I think we have a lot of absurdity and impossibility, and if you enjoy this work that I'm doing, magnetic friends, let me know, and I will continue this series with other ancient memory masters who pick up this strategy of fitting stones into place and smoothing them over. More on memory wheels is potentially coming too, including more on the musical metaphors, such as the circle of fifths, itself a kind of memory wheel. All of these things can help you better weather life's many storms and keep your bucket drawing joy from the deepest wells the greatest of the great memory masters knew was not marked by darkness in the depths of the earth, but pure immanence, the most glorious of all the glorious shining lights, the light that shows you just how far you have yet to go. And you now have Hugh's warning that only an ass treats it like a curse. Even if sometimes we are all like that ass sometimes, we can use the memory palace technique itself to forgive ourselves, forgive others, and then just get back to being busy with the next part of our journey. So, is Hugh's memory palace and the ways you can extend it to make multiple arcs the ultimate path to the ultimate memory palace network? Yes, but only if you make it your own. Until next time, magnetic friends, you can learn more about gathering gems in the video, How to Memorize a Textbook. It's shocking how much of it resembles Hugh of St. Victor's Ancient Wisdom. And if you've already seen that one but missed part 1 of the series you're watching now, why not continue your journey into memory and watch Aristotle's Nuclear Alphabet next?